Coming up on World News this week, calls in Fiji to end a damaging culture of police and military brutality. Also, Australia forced to seek out new countries to detain refugees after the Philippines rejected a resettlement bid. And US and UK officials speculate on terrorist involvement in the Russian airline crash that killed all 224 on board. A very good evening and welcome to EMTV's World News this week. I'm Tokana Hasavi Jr. Thanks for joining us. A plan to resettle refugees in Papua New Guinea has been condemned by Human Rights Commission President Gillian Triggs. Triggs says PNG lacks the capacity and basic infrastructure to meet the needs of asylum seekers. The PNG government, through its national refugee policy, endorsed about 3 weeks ago plans to resettle refugees on Australia's offshore detention camp on Manus Island. Gillian Triggs criticised plans to resettle refugees in PNG, describing the country as struggling. Her criticism comes 2 weeks after the PNG government endorsed plans for refugee settlements in PNG, 3 years after reopening the Manus Processing and Detention Centre. Professor Triggs was concerned about the resettlement of gay refugees in PNG, where homosexuality is illegal, punishable by up to 14 years in prison. She also said the country was facing pressure to provide services to its own people, a statement shared by the public.
Now when you look at them, you may stop lane. Government is providing all service, that's all service. You know, go straight along all village level.
Display big plus ting lo mipla Papua New Guinea mipla ting display mipla mas walk money past them mipla stop good past them okay mipla kare mol narabla line lo narabla country camp the stop one time mipla.
2 weeks ago, Immigration Minister Rembing Pato, in a 2-page press release, explained the national refugee policy for PNG, which also extends to refugees from Indonesia's Papua province of West Papua. It contained 5 key principles that form the basis of the policy. The highlight being point number 4 that says PNG embraces the skills and qualities of refugees, supports them to become self-sufficient and offers them the opportunity to become citizens.
I think some of them have very good skills that they can contribute to the development of Papua New Guinea.
The government should do this, find a way of fitting them in they will feel like they are Papua New Guineans.
Despite the approval of the policy, both the PNG and Australian governments haven't actually outlined where and how many refugees would be resettled in Papua New Guinea. The question of what type of support they would receive also remains unanswered. But Human Rights Commission President Gillian Triggs says access to basic health services in PNG was lacking and high rates of violence would endanger asylum seekers. On the other hand, Australian Foreign Minister Julie Bishop on Friday pushed aside criticism of plans between Australia and Papua New Guinea to resettle refugees in PNG. Minister Bishop, who was in PNG on an official 3-day visit, responded to Human Rights Commission President Gillian Triggs, who this week said PNG lacked the capacity to accommodate the needs of asylum seekers. What's your response to that?
I don't accept that. Papua New Guinea is aware of its obligations to resettle refugees, and together with Australia we will ensure that those who are resettled here have the resources and the opportunities that they need. Already Australian job providers are working with organisations in PNG to ensure that there are job opportunities. This is a growing economy. There are many opportunities for people to work here. There is a booming private sector, so we believe that if these resettled refugees are able to have job opportunities or able to study, go to university here, gain qualifications, then that will be a great outcome.
In Fiji, there are calls to end the country's culture of brutality by police and military personnel. The Citizens Constitutional Forum says it is up to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions and the court system to end the practice of impunity. It says there is a strong national public interest for the office to explain its decision last week to drop manslaughter charges against 8 policemen and a military officer over the death of Vilikesa Soko. He died in hospital of severe injuries after being detained on suspicion of a robbery in Nandi. In Vanuatu, young children are the most prone to the extreme dryness from the El Nino drought that has also impacted other Melanesian countries like Papua New Guinea. The impact in Vanuatu is worsened by the destruction caused by the Category 5 cyclone Pam in March this year, with many villages still on the path of recovery. The ABC reported the death of an infant, with unconfirmed reports of 2 other deaths in the north of Tanna Island, where the effects of the droughts are most felt. The El Nino impact comes off the back of Category 5 cyclone Pam that devastated Vanuatu in March, causing damage estimated at almost 2/3 of the country's GDP. More cyclone activity is expected across the southwest Pacific between November and April due to the strong El Nino effect, which may worsen the current drought conditions. Villages on Tanna, one of the islands worst hit by Cyclone Pam, are bearing much of the brunt. People are struggling to grow crops, water sources are drying up, and people are surviving on government handouts of rice, noodles and tinned fish. Hospital wards are full of malnourished babies and their distraught mothers. Back in Papua New Guinea, the Prime Minister's department says the government has spent almost 13 million kina on relief supplies and deliveries on the worst affected areas. The PNG government estimates providing ongoing food relief will cost about 175 million kina for the next 6 to 12 months. Well, Australia is being forced to seek new countries to take its refugees after the Philippines rejected to accept them. Australia's controversial policy of offshore refugee detention took another blow last week when President Benigno Aquino rejected Australia's proposal to permanently resettle refugees in the Philippines. President Aquino said he was seriously considering an Australian government proposal to accept some refugees, but only if they were in the Southeast Asian nation temporarily. The deal is valued at 150 million Australian dollars over a span of 5 years. He said his country did not have the capacity or the resources to accommodate refugees as it aims to deal with its own internal issues. However, Australian Foreign Minister Julie Bishop, who was in Port Moresby on Friday, said negotiations were still ongoing despite President Aquino's refusal.
We want to see the resettlements take place. Already there have been a number of people who have volunteered to go back home, and I expect that this will be the case. The message to the people smuggling trade is that people who pay people smugglers will not be resettled in Australia.
Canberra had approached Manila after a series of scandals involving allegations of rape, physical abuse and mental cruelty against detainees held on Nauru and Manus Island in Papua New Guinea. A High Court decision in 2011 means that under current laws, Australia can only legally make deals for the processing and resettlement of refugees with countries that signed the UN's 1951 Refugee Convention. In the Southeast Asian region, that does not leave many options. Only Cambodia, East Timor and the Philippines are all signatory countries. In the Pacific region, the small islands of Fiji, Papua New Guinea, Samoa, Tuvalu and the Solomon Islands are all signatories. Tokana Hasavi Jr., EMTV World News. Well, Bank South Pacific has acquired Westpac Banking Corporation in the Solomon Islands. The acquisition process started in January this year and was completed last Friday after both Westpac and BSP obtained the necessary approvals in the Solomon Islands. BSP Group CEO Robin Fleming says the purchase is part of BSP's Pacific-based expansion strategy.
The acquisition has placed Bank South Pacific as a leading Pacific regional financial services business. It is maximizing future opportunities for PNG's growing long-term trade and economic influence in the region. BSP has been expanding in the region since 2006 when it acquired the Habib Bank in Fiji, National Bank of Solomon Islands in 2007, and the colonial groups of companies, banking and life businesses in Fiji in 2009. In July 2015, BSP acquired Westpac operations in Cook Islands, Samoa, and Tonga. The acquisition process started in January this year, and last Friday, BSP completed its purchase of the Westpac Banking Corporation in the Solomon Islands. BSP thanked the Central Bank of Solomon Islands for its approval of the acquisition. BSP has developed a strategic interest to find opportunities, build commercial relationships, and grow its presence in the economies of the South Pacific region. Chairman of BSP, Sir Costas Constantino, said the milestone transaction was also a positive example of the people of the South Pacific island nations developing their capabilities in regional commercial and economic activities. Deli Waigeno, EMTV World News.
Well, coming up after this break, UNHCR reveals startling figures on refugee arrivals into Europe, and an Uber driver jailed in India for the rape of a passenger. We'll bring you those stories and more after this break. Stay with us. Welcome back to EMTV's World News this week. The number of refugees that entered Europe in October by sea was roughly the same figure as the whole of 2014. UNHCR spokesman Adrian Edwards revealed the figures on Monday.
UNHCR recorded 219,000 refugee arrivals by sea during 2014, but a sharp increase this year, following the exodus of millions of refugees fleeing war and poverty, continues to shock European countries into action. The UN Refugee Agency estimated to 700,000 refugee arrivals in Europe this year, but the figure has already been surpassed by tens of thousands. Refugee arrivals in October are also around the same as the whole of 2014.
That's equivalent to the same figure for all of 2014. So it's an enormous number of people. It's producing enormous pressures on places where people are arriving. The Greek island in particular seeing particular strain. On the 20th of October we had more than 10,000 people in a single day on these arriving on islands where there simply hasn't been the capacity to deal with those kind of figures. So a really overwhelming situation.
Switching from the popular route via Libya to Italy, refugees are now flocking to Greece through Turkey. Furthermore, UNHCR does not think the numbers are going to slow down anytime soon.
Certainly in 2016 we have to expect this level of arrivals to continue. And that's because the factors that are causing people to move aren't going away. We are in a period of record numbers of forced displacement globally, almost 60 million people fleeing conflict, fleeing areas of instability. It is the new reality that we all have to deal with, that this is a phenomenon that isn't going away quickly.
Over half of the refugees are from Syria, with Afghans second, making up 18% of the total. Meanwhile, Edwards said there are no alternatives yet for refugees seeking asylum other than a life-threatening journey through illegal smuggling means.
Already there's almost 3,500 deaths have been reported in 2015. As these numbers increase, with still insufficient capacity for this scale of problem and no safe legal alternatives for people to make this route, people are dying.
Well, 15 stories below New York's Midtown Manhattan, construction workers are hard at work on the new Long Island Railroad, set to be the United States' busiest commuter rail system. The project, known as East Side Access, is worth $10.2 billion American dollars and will ease congestion, saving commuters up to 30 to 40 minutes a day. The railroad is set to open in 2022 and includes over 10 kilometers of tunnels, which saw the removal of around 75,000 trucks worth of pulverized rock. New York is in a major construction phase with several other transport projects either recently completed or underway.
Well, if we're going to be competitive with other major capitals around the world, we need to have public transport. The time of moving people in cars is gone, it's passé. We have such an amount of people that need to be moved that unless we have an extremely good and efficient public transport system, we will not be able to compete.
An Indian driver for transport networking company Uber was jailed this week for the rape of a passenger last December. Driver Shiv Kumar Yadav received a life sentence for rape, kidnapping and criminal intimidation under laws updated by the increasingly rape-intolerant country.
Public prosecutor Atul Shrivastava delivered the maximum sentence to Uber driver Shiv Kumar Yadav on Tuesday for kidnapping and raping a passenger who hailed a ride home from a party in Delhi last December. The increasingly outraged public, angered initially by the horrific rape and murder of a young physiotherapist in 2012, influenced authorities to fast-track the trial. Authorities were criticized for not addressing weak laws and policing, which has increased sex crimes against women.
Sentence, I have argued that this is the expectation of the society. So the maximum punishment should be given to awarded to this man, so that the good message to go to the society that we all are safe. And if we are going to commit anything wrong, then we will be handled like this.
Often politicians will blame rape victims for the crime committed against them, demonstrating the gender disparity in the country. Last year, nearly 37,000 rapes were recorded, with nearly 338,000 crimes reported. The incident prompted Uber to tighten driver checks and introduce safety measures. Lian Jarari, EMTV World News.
Coming up on EMTV's World News after this break, officials speculate that terrorist involvement in the crash of a Russian jet that killed all 224 on board, and protesters march in Bangladesh for freedom of speech. Those stories and more after this break. Stay tuned. Welcome back to EMTV's World News this week. UK and US experts are speculating that Russian airline flight 9268, which crashed on Saturday, was brought down by an explosive device. Mourners gathered on Wednesday to commemorate the 224 victims of the crash as investigations deepen.
Although Egyptian authorities have dismissed ISIS involvement, U.S. intelligence suggested a terrorist group, possibly ISIS, may have planted a bomb on the flight, a speculation shared with UK officials. The crash has prompted Russia and the UK to halt all flights between Britain and Egypt's Sharm el-Sheikh, where Flight 9268 was departing before it crashed into the Sinai Desert.
Well, obviously, we've been following the investigation into the crash that took place on Saturday very closely. We cannot categorically say why the Russian jet crashed, but we have become concerned that the plane may well have been brought down as a result of an explosive device. Safety will always be the priority, and that is why the Prime Minister last night called President Sisi to express concern and to ensure that the tightest possible security arrangements were put in place at Sharm el-Sheikh. As a precautionary measure, we've decided that flights due to leave Sharm el-Sheikh this evening for the UK will be delayed, and that will allow us time to ensure that the right security measures are in place for flights.
Meanwhile, streets in Russia's second largest city of St. Petersburg, where the fateful plane had been headed, were packed with commemorators on Wednesday, paying their respects to the 224 victims, which included 17 children. Around 200 victims of the flight have already arrived in Russia, with the remaining 28 delayed, due to the corpses not being intact, requiring further search efforts to uncover body parts and conduct DNA tests.
We obviously cancelled everything. The Presidium gathered and cancelled this event, a mass march which was supposed to happen today, and instead there is an absolutely depoliticized event, not connected to anything. A memorial service for the deceased to show we are together with you. That is our city that has been affected the most.
Today is a day of mourning that St. Petersburg had extended, and I think that everyone needs to show understanding.
Egyptian officials, after acquiring the black box, revealed to Interfax news agency of an apparent emergency situation evident in the recordings that took the crew by surprise, leaving no time to send out a distress signal. While U.S. intel on Monday reported a strong heat flash picked up by an American satellite at the time of the crash. Alana Lee, EMTV World News.
The nightmare that Russia is enduring is far from over. Some of the bodies of the victims have been flown home and funerals have been held for them.
In a tiny chapel near St. Petersburg, the grief of an entire nation is pouring out. The tears are for Nina Lushenko, a 60-year-old canteen worker at a local school. Now the first victim of Russia's worst ever air catastrophe to be laid to rest. You always greeted us with a smile, says her grieving colleague. You were full of kindness and humanity, and we will always remember you, she says. Russians are no strangers to air disasters, but this latest appears to have struck a chord. Perhaps because the passengers were mainly families, including at least 25 children, on a cheap Egyptian holiday to escape the Russian cold. Ordinary Russians know it could so easily have been one of them. Outside St. Petersburg, another funeral of another victim. The bereaved mother of 31-year-old Alexei Alexeyev grasps his portrait to her heart. He was awarded the holiday with another colleague by the heating factory they worked for, a common bonus for Russian employees. Their boss was among the mourners. They were enjoying themselves, he says, sending photos and messages to us. When I was called on Saturday, I just couldn't believe it, he adds. Here I am alive, and my guys are gone. It is that sense of utter shock this entire nation now shares.
Well, top diplomats from the US and Russia are among the familiar faces in Vienna for a new round of talks on ending the Syrian war. The war in Syria has been ongoing since 2011, killing more than 250,000 people and displacing millions.
The first day of the talks here in Vienna started off with a flurry of diplomatic activity led by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry. In the evening hours of Thursday, he had a meeting with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, as well as with the foreign ministers of Turkey and Saudi Arabia as well. Now, of course, especially the Turks and the Saudis are highly skeptical of this meeting, and the main reason for that is because for the first time in such a format trying to solve the Syria crisis, the Iranians are involved as well. They're represented by their foreign minister Javad Zarif. He also had a meeting with Secretary of State John Kerry, but before that, Javad Zarif said that the Iranians' participation in this meeting here is not based on any conditions.
We believe that Iran is a government and a country that has been a positive force in the region, and you could not put conditions on Iran's presence in the talks. Therefore, no conditions were placed on our attendance at these talks, and if there had been, we would not have accepted that.
The fact that this meeting here in Vienna is taking place at all is something that diplomats of almost all countries say already represents a lot of progress, because we know, of course, that the peace process to try and get the fighting in Syria to end was something that's been stalemated for a very long time. Now, the big sticking point is and remains the future of Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad. The Turks and the Saudis say Assad must go if there is going to be even the chance of trying to stop the fighting in Syria. However, of course, we know that the Iranians and the Russians have a very different take. They say they're not averse to a political transition process, but they say that they believe that Assad, at least for a certain amount of time, could be part of that political transition. Now, the talks here, nobody really believes that they are going to lead to some sort of solution of the crisis, that there might be some sort of peace deal that could be forthcoming. But senior diplomats here in Vienna tell us they say that if these talks progress, if these talks continue, if the people who are a part of these talks decide to continue them in such a format and the talks don't completely fall apart, that can already be seen as a success.
Well, Russia's defense ministry announced on Thursday a total of 81 sorties with 263 targets hit so far. The ministry released footage of the Russian Air Force airstrikes showing bombs hitting a militant training range, a bomb factory and terrorist stronghold. Russia is 1 month into its Syrian civil war campaign since joining at the end of September this year. According to the US State Department, Russia's intervention in the campaign backing Syria against ISIS has mostly hit other insurgents, including more moderate groups.
Over the last 48 hours, Russian aviation group jets have performed 81 sorties against 263 targets in the Syrian Republic in Aleppo, Damascus, Deir al-Zor, Idlib, Latakia, Raqqa, Hama and Homs.
The murder of journalists represents a clear restriction on media freedom and freedom of speech. The South Asian country of Bangladesh, however, is fiercely protecting theirs, gathering in the streets this week to protest against the murders of 4 bloggers.
With 4 bloggers hacked to death in similar style this year, after blogging on atheism while critically assessing Islam, Bangladesh authorities are speculating that the perpetrators may even be international terrorist groups. Islamist extremists have even published lists of bloggers they disapprove of, with some claiming responsibility for the deaths, while police recently arrested at least 15 members of a local Islamist group, apparently linked to Al-Qaeda. The strike was led by the People's Resurgence platform.
We are going to start a coffin march towards Home Ministry against the impunity that already deep-rooted and, against the killing of blogger, publisher and writers, and against the challenge against free thinkers.
Teachers and students marched in protest, as well as party members, with some students burning an effigy of the country's Home Minister for his inaction in arresting the killers. The Muslim-majority nations cracked down on Islamist groups attempting to create a state based on Muslim law or Sharia law resulted in the attacks. Alana Lee, EMTV World News.
Coming up after this break, a rare blue diamond valued in the millions expected to break auction records, and a significant development for NASA scientists on discovering how the planet Mars was once able to sustain surface water. Those stories coming up after this break. Stay with us. Good to have you back with MTV's World News this week. Well, it's been 3 years since Hurricane Sandy destroyed thousands of homes in New York, and in doing so, landed a major blow on the city's economy. Following the hurricane, there were some ambitious plans to defend the city from vicious storms. Experts say if average global temperatures rise by just 2 degrees Celsius, New York may become one of the victims of global catastrophe. There are now efforts to protect the Big Apple.
Traveling by dinghy in New York's choppy harbor, you get a first-hand view of the shifting tides. My guide is Alexandros Washburn, New York's urban design chief under Mayor Bloomberg, now a professor in coastal resiliency.
So all this area in the Battery was breached during Sandy, and we had just finished the new subway stop that was completely ruined.
3 years ago, Superstorm Sandy brought a record 13-foot storm surge at Battery Park on Manhattan's southern tip, knocking out power and flooding much of the financial district. Throughout the city, over 300,000 homes were damaged and 44 people died. Then Mayor Michael Bloomberg launched an ambitious $20 billion program to bolster the fragile shoreline.
We've already put in place an additional 4.2 million cubic yards of sand on our beaches. Nearly 10 miles of dunes have been constructed across the city. We are definitely safer now than we were when Sandy hit.
The city tightened up building codes too, and this summer committed another $100 million for Lower Manhattan.
The idea is that we're going to integrate flood protection into the neighborhood. So we're finding a mix of both permanent and deployable or temporary measures that can be brought to bear and provide that flood protection when needed.
With 520 miles of coastline, New York has always been vulnerable to storms. Now scientists say climate change has created a double threat.
Not only are storms like Sandy expected to become much more frequent, but sea levels will also rise. One forecast puts it at 6 feet by the end of the century. You don't have to be a scientist to see New York doesn't have 6 feet to spare. Planning ahead will help.
This is the first of a new generation of super high resolution sensors, and they are going to be the first line of defense in protecting the city. We're asking government to be more nimble than it's ever been. I think that's really the challenge. Is our government able to make decisions fast enough, that we are actually going to succeed.
Alex Washburn lived through Sandy, the first floor of his house on the southern tip of Brooklyn still boarded up. A painted blue line shows where the government recommends raising the living space to survive a similar flood.
I don't think we can fully defend against the water, so we have to manage a relationship with it.
The challenge now to manage it quicker than the rising tide.
An extremely rare 12-carat blue diamond was unveiled in a Sotheby's exhibit in Geneva on Wednesday. The extremely rare diamond was discovered at a South African mine in January last year and is expected to break an auction record next week with a price estimate of between $35 to $55 million. The diamond was given the title of Fancy Vivid Blue by the Gemological Institute of America. So it gets its color from small amounts of the chemical compound boron, which gets trapped inside the diamond during its formation, according to geologists. The diamond is a star piece in Sotheby's Magnificent Jewels and Nobel Jewels auction and was exhibited in Hong Kong, London and New York before arriving in Geneva to go on auction next Wednesday.
You're looking at something that, by a freak of nature, has been brought up by a volcano. It's just so extraordinary that this diamond would have stayed, forever miles under the Earth's surface. But by the fact that it was associated with a volcano, it is now part of our world. I find that absolutely extraordinary. It's like the most secret part of the Earth. It's just been shown to us.
Well, NASA scientists documented an important development in their theory of how the planet Mars was once able to sustain surface water. The maiden spacecraft has observed the solar storm stripping away the planet's atmosphere. NASA scientist Jared Espley says, unlike Earth, Mars does not have a global magnetic field to protect its atmosphere, which leaves it vulnerable to solar activity.
We look at Mars today and we can see that there are these dry rivers, there are these dry lakes, but then we also see that Mars is a dry, desolate place. And so something had to happen to change it from a place where there could be water to make those rivers and lakes and gullies to someplace that's a desert today. And what we think is happening is our MAVEN spacecraft is able to see the atmosphere of Mars being stripped away gradually over billions of years by the solar wind, which is a gas that comes flowing out from the sun, and it gradually will blow away the atmosphere bit by bit over billions of years. Certainly, the results that we're seeing lead credence to the idea that ancient Mars was a warm, wet, and possibly habitable environment. And so it is a really interesting result in terms of trying to understand how planets evolved, both Mars and Earth. Earth actually has a global planetary magnetic field. That's why our compasses point north here at Earth. At Mars, it doesn't have a planetary global magnetic field. And so that means that the solar wind is able to interact directly with the Martian atmosphere. Whereas here at Earth, a planetary magnetic field protects us from the solar wind. The solar wind itself is mostly absorbed by the Martian atmosphere. That's why we actually think it's being stripped away. But it's those higher energy radiation that comes from the sun, beyond even the solar wind, that we think would be most dangerous to astronauts. Each part of the science that we learn about the, say, the atmosphere or the surface or the upper atmosphere, like what we're studying with MAVEN, they all fit together to help us understand how Mars is a planet.
Now here's something to take us to world sports tonight. It's a sport that dates back to the 1400s, originally played by one of the world's most sophisticated civilizations. Excitement was running high in the village of Coya in the South American country of Peru as residents gathered to watch two teams, Coya Runa and Coya Cosco, compete in the highly anticipated Gallardo match, a sport resembling modern-day field hockey played by their Inca ancestors. Well, each team is comprised of 15 players who use large sticks to hit a 4-kilogram ball to the opposite end of the field in order to score points. Before the game starts, players stomp the sticks on the ground as part of the ancient pre-match ritual. Similar to hockey, the referee sets the game in motion by throwing the ball to the center of the field, where players jostle to get it in their possession. Chicha de Chora a traditional alcohol beverage made from corn, is a key part of the festive sporting event, and the best players are served with the Andean beer in a wooden cup. Participants Florencio Morales explain how the Gallardo match is played every year to honor the planting of potato crops.
This Inca Gallardo is a tradition from our Inca ancestors, and we continue to keep it alive only in this village of Coya. This custom is carried out every November 2nd to honor the planting of potatoes, the Papa Kasui.
The Incas, they go way back. They built the largest empire in the New World between 1400 and 1532 AD. Incan civilization is best known for the city of Machu Picchu, the ruins of which are Peru's top tourist destination and considered one of the new 7 wonders of the world. Well, coming up next, we have World Sports with Dion Komang. Don't go away, stay with us.
Good evening and welcome to World Sports. I'm Dion Kombang. The Melbourne Cup kicked off last week and the winning jockey happened to be the very first female to take the cup in Australia's most prestigious equestrian event. Payne rode to victory on Prince of Penzance, bought in New Zealand and trained by local trainer Darren Ware. Ware said expectations were definitely exceeded.
Just going into like a top 10 chance, thinking that we could probably run somewhere between 5th and 10th. Which was a really good price, mate.
In the country, we were just 2 little kids, and to think that we beat the rest of the world yesterday.
It's official, cricket is going to America, with some of the biggest names who've played the game, the legendary Sachin Tendulkar and former Australian skipper Ricky Ponting. But just how do you sell the sport to Americans? One of the greatest spin bowlers of all time, Shane Warne, had a chat with CNN.
There'll be, 2 teams, Sachin's Blasters and my team, the Warriors, will play against each other. We've got 28 of some of the all-time greatest players coming to play. We've signed them up for 3 years for 15 games. So this is the start of the Cricket All-Stars. This is our first 3 games. And when you think about some of the greatest players ever to play, playing iconic baseball stadiums on a drop-in pitch in New York, it's pretty amazing, and I think it's going to be a great experience for everybody.
Okay, so matches in New York and Houston, and then we've got Los Angeles under the floodlights. Now, you've talked about DJs and music and the fan experience. What can fans expect?
Yeah, well, I think there's a really good analogy that Sachin Tendulkar, who I'm hosting these games with, said yesterday. He said when a lot of his friends came to America in the early 90s, they all have now become doctors and the like. And what they did, their American friends that they had, took them to educate them about the American sports. Now it's time to reciprocate and for all the cricket-loving people here in America to grab their American friends and start to educate them about the game of cricket. And what to expect, pure entertainment. If you like your baseball, you can see 1 homer in so many innings. You might see basically a homer every over in cricket here in New York, especially here. It's quite a small stadium, so I think there's going to be some big hits. You'll see some athletic fielding. You'll see some of these guys that have been some of the greatest players of all time do their stuff. And, they've been training pretty hard over the last couple of days. There's been they're not going to be taking it easy. They're going to be super competitive games, and I think you're going to see a lot of fun.
World football superstar David Beckham arrived in Mount Hagen last week amidst much fanfare and was greeted by Minister for Sport Justin Chichenko. Beckham was in the country as part of his role with the United Nations as a Goodwill Ambassador. His trip to Mount Hagen was to support his worldwide charity program of supplying nutritional milk to children in third world countries. He visited the children's ward at the Mount Hagen General Hospital and also had a game of soccer with the locals as part of his program entitled Love of the Game, which will see him play 7 games in 7 countries. The former England captain enjoyed success at Manchester United, Real Madrid, Paris Saint-Germain and the LA Galaxy. And that's all the world sports we have for you this week. Stay tuned for the weather coming up next.
Welcome back to EMTV's World News This Week. Now, let's take a look at the weather from around the globe. And lastly tonight, you've seen Marvel Comics' Amazing Spider-Man come to life when Tobey Maguire played Peter Parker, who gets bitten by a lab spider that gives him incredibly enhanced reflexes, superhuman strength, great wall crawling skills, and the awesome ability to shoot powerful strings of web out of his wrist, which allows him to swing from building to building just like Tarzan. Now back to reality. Imagine Spider-Man as a normal human being without any superhuman strength or enhanced reflexes, or without any skyscraper swinging ability. Who do you get? You get French climber Alan Robert, also known as France's Spider-Man. Robert uses nothing but his bare hands with absolutely no safety measures. He's climbed over 100 buildings, including the New York Times building in New York and Burj Al Khalifa in Dubai, the world's tallest building. He's already climbed the Ariane building in 2014, but this week he tried again and the weather conditions were not favorable.
I was thinking, well, okay, for the moment there is no rain, but what will it be like in 10 meters, 15 meters, 20 meters? I climbed to find out.
The amazing France's Spider-Man. And now a quick recap of our top stories tonight. Calls in Fiji to end a damaging culture of police and military brutality. Also, Australia forced to seek out new countries to detain its refugees after the Philippines rejected a resettlement bid. And US and UK officials speculate on terrorist involvement in the Russian airline crash that killed all 224 passengers on board. And that's all the world news we have for you this week. Stay tuned for Top Pixar. That's coming up next. I'm Tokana Asavi Jr. Thanks for joining us. Until the next time, you take care and stay happy. Good night.